This is Beyond with Heather Tesch, where we examine near-death experiences and life itself, hopefully making this life a little better. Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining us. And Marlene, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh my gosh, Heather, it's such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on. It was so good to see you again and to have your time here.
Oh, thank you. It's great to see you again. Cara and I met at the IANS conference, which is the International Association for Near-Death Studies. And you told me a bit about your story. And then afterward, I read your book and I was so inspired by your story. So I'd love you to share it with all of my audience and everybody that's listening out there. So if you could start, maybe take us back to when you were 8 years old, your life then, and then lead us into your near-death experience and your story.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. So I was born and raised in a very small town in Kansas, in the country. And when I was 8 years old, I was out with my sister, my youngest sister. We were riding bikes, and we were called in to come in for lunch, and it was a beautiful spring day. You know, the big puffy clouds, blue skies, gorgeous. I loved being outside. I loved being on a bike. It was something I still actually love doing. And I had been inspired by BMXers from my friend's house. And so, of course, like I wanted to get one more run in. And so at the family ranch. So my father had a construction business and a ranch. And so on the bottom of a hill, there was a big barn and then a garage that was next to it. And that's where all the tools and things like that for the tool shed were. And in that was the very entryway was a concrete slab, 4x4 maybe. And there was like a divot like cut out of it. That slab was to make sure the water doesn't get into the shop. And I thought that would be a nice ramp to kind of catch some air, you know, and be cool. So, I started off from the very top of the hill and I went as fast as I could down it towards that shed. And when my bike hit that water lip, it stopped and I went head over heels. It was in the 80s. So no helmet, nothing, you know, not like today. And, I remember the moment I lifted off the bike, that sensation of kind of flying. But then, from the moment I left to when I hit the ground, it's as if my awareness expanded. I know that now it almost felt like I, as a child, like midair, like just expanded. I could feel and see and take in everything. It was just a split second because, after that, I heard, not felt myself hit the ground. It was as if I was in this protective bubble. And, I remember the sickening thud that I heard and then, feeling my body, kind of collapse on itself and everything going dark. And what I remember next is kind of like coming to, there was a kind of blinking myself awake. There was the rectangle of light, from the garage door, and everything else was just black, and trying to get things in focus. As I was doing that, I noticed there was a figure in the light rectangle, and I assumed it was my sister. And, when I tried to get up, I became terrified because I realized that it felt as, it wasn't necessarily that I couldn't move, you know, like when you hurt yourself and you're too groggy, like you can't move. It felt as if I was like trapped in a body or a corpse. That's literally, I was so separated from myself. Felt like my soul was trapped in this body, but I could still see what was going on. And so anyway, when I noticed that figure, I spoke to it as if it was my little sister. I said, I need help. I need you to go get help. I need you to go to the house. Something's terribly wrong. I can't move. I need help. And, they never moved. And so of course I got angry and I started, speaking to them. I was like, you know, mom and dad are going to be so mad at you, trying to, you know, really encourage them to go help me. And the more, worked up I got, the more terrified I was because I just knew I needed help and they weren't helping me. And as I was kind of talking, that awareness I was speaking about started taking in what was around me. And finally I faded from speaking and I started looking around. And I remember taking my eyes away from the light and looking at the darkness around me. And it wasn't just darkness the more I looked at it. It was like it had no shape and no form. And I realized it was space. It looked like space, right? Like, as a second grader that you talk about like spaceships and stars and things like that and planets. It felt as if that space in between everything. And then I remember thinking, well, that's so strange because it's like that, my body that I was in, it felt as if like, it was something was holding me up, but I knew like looking around, like that there was nothing there. It shouldn't feel like a physical form. It should feel like I was falling, but it wasn't. Something was holding me up. And then when I looked back at the light, it wasn't just blinding. Like it wasn't like sunlight. I should have been able to see through it. Like I should have been able to see like the rolling hills and the plains of Kansas. I should have seen like the 30-foot trailer, cattle trailer and the hay barn. And I couldn't see that. And the more I took it in, I realized that this was light and life itself. And so in that moment, I realized that like I was looking at that place that people spoke about when they died. It was like that space was holding that life and light itself. And I was just literally looking at the space between. And I was so moved because it was just, it was almost as if when all of that came together, I realized that I was in this beautiful space where love existed. And I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel worry anymore. It was like this joy and peace and love just cracked open from inside of me. And I was just completely overwhelmed. And, when I looked back at the figure, kind of realizing that, I said, am I dying? Am I dead? Is this what happens when you die? And again, this overwhelming joy and understanding that yes, that's where I was. And this is what happens after we die. And that figure, wasn't as if it spoke to me. It was like this. I know when people speak about near-death experiences, we can't really describe what happens, but it's like a voice, a knowing inside, relays to us that that's what's going on. And so as I kind of sat in that understanding, I kind of had a very brief, kind of a life review. I was 8. So it was like, my mom, my dogs, my cats, like everything's okay. Like, I kind of had that understanding. And then I looked back at the figure, and with my inner voice, I spoke to that figure, because we had this communication again after I knew where I was, that this is where I was going and everything was going to be okay. It asked me if I was ready. And I said, yeah, I am. But I didn't speak with my voice. I spoke with my inner voice. And it was so clear that communication was just shockingly intimate. And the moment that I said yes, it was as if I fell into that chasm of, not a chasm. It was almost like this space where joy and love and perfection, the perfect essence of love itself existed in me. And I fell into it. And I remember as I was falling, I had complete trust in where I was going, what was happening. It wasn't like, again, there was no fear, no worry. It's like I couldn't even exist there. And I remember as I was falling into that place, it was like I crossed this threshold of where fear could exist. It was like fear could not exist here where I was, but fear could exist here. And I believe that's where I went back into my body. And I remember waking up, and I'm speaking to my mother as if I'm speaking to you, and hours had passed, right? And I was on the couch, and, my mother looked at me because I'd stopped speaking. And, I said, where am I? Like, what happened? How did I get here? Because I had no memory from the moment that I crossed that threshold into that moment, like the conversation with my mother. And, she got frustrated and flustered and left and whatnot. Cause I could not understand what she was talking about. And, I had a mirror in my hand, and all I could see was kind of this part of my face, like the inner nose and like my little chubby little cheeks and my lips. And I kind of like tilted it as if, trying to see my face. You know, that's kind of what we do, right? And I remember screaming when I saw my head. Like, if you took an orange and you cut it in half and you put it on a second grader's face, it was like I was swollen from my brow all the way into like my hairline. And, it took them a while to get me into the doctor. I think days it was. And, I remember the doctor having this conversation, like, he was very mad at my mom. Like, you don't get mad at my mom, but he was very mad at my mom. And he was like, why did you take so long to get her here? Like, she should not be here. She should be dead. Like, there's no reason why she should be here. The only thing that saved her, he's like, the only thing I think that saved her was it swelled out and not in. Like, it could have been so much worse. And so anyhow, but I remember being so different from that day on that, like everything was different for me though, from that day on. So that was my near-death experience.
And then it wasn't long after that you had another experience when you fell down a stairs.
Yes. And so, it is so interesting. So, talking about my book, these things started coming to my memory, and I didn't really think anything of it, but there was, I was at my grandmother's, my father's mother's house. And I'm sure it was because, you know, I never really fit in after that. Like, I was very gullible, very naive. I think that we all know that after like near-death experiences, we're different. And I think because mine as a kid, it kind of made me, and different, and, they couldn't really understand why I was kind of the way I was. And so anyway, I was always kind of bullied. So anyway, I was at my grandmother's house, and, we were upstairs with my other cousins and, playing Atari. And of course I was like, you know, kind of kicked off. I wasn't very good. And I was kind of like trudging down the stairs, you know, kind of like licking my wounds. And, there were toys on the stairs and whatnot, and my foot caught one, and I flipped into the air and I landed, curved back on my spine. And I remember something like cracked in. I knew when I landed, it didn't just take my breath away. It didn't just hurt. Like, I knew something was really, really wrong. And, I remember being able to understand that, but then almost immediately I was led back into this space inside of me where that voice, that presence, told me to breathe into the pain. It's almost like that awareness. Remember when, I heard myself, didn't feel myself hit the ground. It's almost like there was almost a separation from the pain. For just a split second, it said, you need to breathe into this pain. And I didn't want to, because it was so overwhelming. But I said, okay. And so I started breathing into that with my eyes closed, and I was on the stairs, and, it's like I was taken to this place where I could see, like in my mind's eye, I could see this white light kind of throbbing from that space, that place on my spinal cord where I hit that stair. And, it was like the more I breathed into it, the more I could, it was like this mix of pain and light and whatever was happening. And now I understand that was, what I believe to be energy healing. And this blend of all of that. And, I was kind of in this altered conscious state, and, kind of like a trance. We'll call it more of like a trance than an altered state of mind, because that feels like you're kind of going somewhere else, but, still present, but in this space. And, I remember like distantly, like I was picked up by someone, and, I kind of came to in my sister's arms, and, I kind of took in everything that was around me, and she kind of looked like, she's like, are you okay? And I was like, yes, I am. But, I was, but I wasn't, because I didn't understand what happened. One, two, I knew something really bad happened to me, but I knew that everything was better now because, I could stand. It wasn't hard to breathe anymore. It was like all of that pain, that injury was just gone. It wasn't just like, oh, it felt better. No, it was like, it was gone. And the only remnants was like this like kind of like this throbbing, it didn't hurt. It was like a dull throb in my back. But I remember distinctly in those moments, inside myself, it was like this bright white light came from that spot. And, I remember that voice telling me to breathe, and then something happening, something kind of knitting back together. That's the only way I can explain it.
And that wasn't the only healing you had. If we fast forward, so I believe you're in your early 30s.
Yes.
Tell us that story.
Okay. Yes. So I think that is a beautiful precursor for what happened. So yes, I found myself, I was 32 years old. It's 2015 and 32 years old. And I was in, was it 32? Yeah. About to be, 32 years old. So 31. And, I just moved to Fort Worth, Texas. I had a, kind of a restart, right? And so I found myself, starting, a small business, making new friends. And one night, maybe a couple months into me moving there, I was, getting ready, to go out with my roommates. And I remember I was buttoning up the front clasp of my bra, and, my left hand brushed something hard, just outside of my lower left cleavage. And, all these thoughts just raced through my mind. And, I quickly just stopped them, because I'm 31. There's no history in my family. Like, there's no reason to worry. And so I just buttoned up my bra and like went on my merry way, until the spring of that next year when, it was 2016. My estranged mother gave me a phone call and told me that she had the same cancer that killed her mother at her age. And, that started a journey that I needed to, get testing and stuff. And because she not only had, ovarian cancer, she had a BRCA2 gene mutation that gives you a 75% chance of getting all the killer cancers, breast, ovarian, things like that. And so, I of course put it off because I was like, again, I'm 32 now. I don't, obviously I'm too young for this, right? Until that fall, that same year, 2016, my estranged father called me and told me he had, the same cancer that killed his sister, and thyroid cancer. And his father died of cancer. And so I kind of go into like a tailspin, and, between avoidance and denial, how that kind of goes. And it ended up being the very beginning of 2017 when I got the paperwork back that I had the same gene mutation of my mother, with both my grandparents and both my parents being diagnosed. I had now an 80% and higher chance of getting all of the cancers, the killer cancers. And so I put off getting anything done. And it doesn't make a lot of sense now, but, it took until a week before my 33rd birthday, which was in May. And I was 32, and, it was a Thursday, and my friends actually they had to give me an intervention, actually get me in there, because I don't know. I don't know why. But, I'm in the doctor's office and I'm speaking to this assistant, and I find myself anxious isn't the word. It's anxious, kind of bordering on just absolutely terrified. And, every time I have to relay like my grandparents, my parents, like diagnosis, treatments, and then deaths, of course. And, I just felt like I just couldn't handle it. She finishes, thankfully. This beautiful, short, wonderful, pregnant little nurse came in, and, she was trying to be as chipper as she could and as loving as she could. But, I could not, handle it. So she laid me on the table. She lifted my left arm and opened my gown and started the examination. And, she was making small talk, trying to calm me, and whatnot. And as she got through, my left side, she hit this spot on my lower left cleavage, and I snapped, and I grabbed both of her hands and I lifted them off of me. And, I grabbed her too hard, and I snapped too sharply. And I said, ouch, that hurts. Do not do that again. And she looks at me briefly, looks at the assistant, and the assistant, nothing is said, and the assistant just leaves. And, she ends up kind of wiggling herself free, closing my gown and putting her hands on my thigh, like my upper thigh, kind of trying to comfort me. And she says, "Where are you from again? Tell me about that." And, like in my confusion, I have maybe moments. This tall, thin mechanical doctor bursts into the room, introduces herself, displaces the other nurse, and basically takes her place. And, to start the examination, obviously, again. Now that nurse goes immediately around the table and, like sidles up to my right side, gets as close as she can, and just stares at me with a smile. And the doctor, I see her staring at the nurse, like over her glasses, gives her kind of a look, lifts my left arm, opens my gown, and then starts again. And it was just absolutely, it felt unrelenting, because like, I then was so confused. My anxiety was now like absolutely terrified, and no one was saying anything. And on top of that, I had to go through, because the doctor wanted me to go through all of the diagnosis, all of the background, everything like that. And so I was just trying to hold it together. And the doctor got through the left side, and she hit that same spot that nurse did. And I tried to lift her arms up, and I snapped at her, and I said, "Ouch, it hurts. Don't do that again." And her arms never left. She stared right at me, and she kept poking and prodding around something that felt like a screwdriver driving into my rib cage. It was just too much. And so I found myself clenching my teeth, breathing through my teeth. And by the time she was finished with the examination, she had said things, like measurements and whatnot. And I really wasn't present for anything after she said bilateral breast cancer. And I, just kept staring at that ceiling, trying to breathe, not to break. And the doctor and the assistant left, and this beautiful nurse, came up to me, kind of broke me out of my state of mind. And she had a false breast, and she put it on, my solar plexus. And she said, "I want to show you something." And so she folded my hands like this, and she put it on the false breast with hers on top, and she pressed down, and I immediately recoiled, because it hurt to the touch. It was like if you took your pinky index finger, the top digit, and you ground it to a point and made it hard as stone. And that's what it felt like. It was painful. And so I remember her taking a visual breath. She replaced my hands on top of my own, where that spot was where she and the doctor found. And she pressed down. And when I say it hurt not just my fingers, but part of me, because what I felt was that same pinky digit size lump ground to a point there in my rib cage. And it hurt into like my bones and my body and my soul. And it resonated a truth I could not deny anymore. And I just broke on that table with her. Heather, she let me cry there for, as long as I needed. And, she waited for me, and she said goodbye to me. She walked me all the way to the door, and she said goodbye to me. She said, "It's going to be okay." When I left there, I had, a 3D mammogram, an ultrasound for an emergency lumpectomy, for Monday, because they couldn't get me in any sooner. And so, I also had papers in my hand with chemo and radiation and a double mastectomy, all of these things kind of scheduled. And so I had 3 days. And so the first day, I called my brothers over. They were friends, very much like brothers, to me. We'd actually gone to the same church before we both left at the same time. And, ended up, I invited them over, and I just told them everything. I told them my family history, what I was going to walk through, and basically kind of asking them for help and just wanting them to help support me however they could. And they watched me with a visual patience that I didn't understand. Like, they just kind of listened. And at the end, they said, "Cara, thank you for sharing that. We're sorry you're going through this, but you're not going to have to go through that, because we're going to lay hands on you and heal you right now." And Now I had a very religious, strict religious background, and I'd been to like tent revivals and things, and I still know people in wheelchairs. And so that we got prayed over. And so it's not like I didn't believe in the power and I didn't believe that they were trying to love me. I just know what I saw. And so I didn't want to deny their love for me or what they were trying to do. So of course I let them, and we had a beautiful experience. I felt so close to them, but I didn't feel anything. And so I said goodbye to them. And then the next day, Saturday, I called everyone I knew. I started very early in the morning and asking for help, for treatments, paying for things like that. And by the time I was finished, it was dark outside and I was exhausted and I didn't have a car at the time. And so I ended up biking across Fort Worth to the house I was, dog sitting at. And, I truly believe that animals know things that we do not know, because the three very energetic dogs that I were normally like yapping and like jumping up and down and things just sat there completely silent as I walked into the house, closed the door, took my shoes off. I mean, the only thing I heard as I walked all the way around the house to the bedroom I was staying at, the guest room, was the pat of my bare feet and the click of their heels on the hardwood floor. And I remember walking into the room, 2 dogs laid on the floor and one took her spot on the bed. And I just could not, looking at that bed, imagine going to sleep. And so I sat on the edge of the bed and I looked out this floor to ceiling wall window. And there was a deep slate blue and black shadows of the greenery outside, and it contrasted with because it was a full moon, or it was a fuller moon, because like the moonlight was dancing on the water, the pool, and off the stones that surrounded it. And I just stared there, and what normally would bring me peace and solace, I just stared at nothing. And in those long minutes, because I don't remember how long it was, in that silence, I remember that silence turning into like a stillness. Like the energy of the room shifted, and that stillness came over me. And the stillness didn't frighten me, because it was the same stillness that I would find growing up when I needed to commune with what people would call the divine, or God, what I would call love. And the trials that I had growing up, and the loneliness, and seeing, because after my near-death experience, I was just overwhelmed by love, and I just wanted to be in that oneness and share that with everyone. And of course, that world just could not accept that. And so I found myself very lonely. And so I would find time where I would just be alone in nature or in my room, and I would ask questions and find answers in that dwelling place, is what I call it. And I found myself in that space, and I remember saying to love, I said, I know you're good. Even though I know what I face and I know what my family's faced, I know you're good. And you just proved yourself too many times for me to deny that. But I know my road that I have to travel, and I know what my brothers have said. And, but I also know I just don't want to do this. I've lived a good life. I've done amazing things. I've had this commune with you, love. And I just don't want to do it. And so in those moments of just mulling over this and dwelling on it, it kind of got to the point where I just accepted it. I was like, this is just whatever, happens. And I sat in that understanding for a few moments. And then it's like a stirring happened in me. And it's almost like it was stirring me to ask something. And I didn't know what to ask. And it was about this. And there was something else I didn't understand. And then so finally I got so frustrated. I was just like, I don't know what you want from me. I don't know what to do. If there's something else, I just don't know what it is. So I need you to show up. I need you to tell me what to do. And just then, like 2 Bible verses of all things drop into my understanding. And the first one was faith like a child, which made sense, right? Because that was a Bible verse. Since I was raised Christian, I'm not religious and I'm not a Christian, but there are truths in the Bible that bring peace and joy, and just like there's truth in any religion, right? And truth is truth. And so, but that one brought me peace in that moment because I have faith, right? I have faith to walk through this, no matter what it looks like. But the second one was the story of when people were too sick, or were sick, very, very sick, and too poor to get help. And so they would go to a church and have them lay hands on people and pray. And so I thought that I misheard. I thought I was like so upset, like I was playing tricks on myself or whatever. And I sat there for a moment saying, okay, I'm sure I heard you wrong. And I sat there with love for a moment, and that reassurance never left. And so I said, fine. The next morning was Sunday, and I told my brothers that I was going to go to their church. Now, a brief history. I'd been to this church before, and this church, and I did not. I found out I was very unwelcome very quickly, and this is why. They would say things that I could not accept as truth. Like they said that no one can get the power of healing or the power of God unless it came from them, because they were anointed by God and it can only come from them. And so I would tell them, I would share examples, even Bible verses, things like that. And they, of course, disagreed. And so you can understand that after me leaving that church and making them understand why I was leaving, when I walked back in, I said, listen, this is what I was told. I was told to come in and have people lay hands on me and pray because I have bilateral breast cancer. And they tentatively agreed after long moments. And I was in the pew, front pew, music had started. And after the first song, the pastor wife got up and brought everyone she had anointed, they called them elders, to lay hands on me and pray. And I think there were like 8 of them. And some were singing, some were speaking in tongues, and other things. Some were singing. And I remember the longer they were there, the harder I cried because I felt nothing. And they ended up leaving me just weeping on the front pew. And I knew that my two hands were left on me. One was my friend Chris, and the other one was a small hand, like on the middle of my left side of my back. And I remember closing my eyes and going back into that space within me. And I said, I still know you're good. Even though this didn't work, I still know you're good. And I know the path that I'm to walk, and I know what I've accepted, and that's okay. And I know with you, meaning love, I have the faith and the strength to get through this. And so whatever your will is, I accept. And the moment, Heather, I said accept, this like palm width beam of power came from that small hand on the left side of my middle of my back, and it went straight through my chest cavity, split, hovered over both breast lumps, and then hovered there for songs. Like, with my eyes closed in that space, much like when in my near-death experience and that time on the stairs, it was like I could see it. It's like I could see that white pulsing light coming from that hand. And as it was moving, it felt as if it was like doing something over those breast lumps. And eventually, I felt it dissipate into me, like become one. And I was so caught up with it. Again, it felt like I was in that trance space or that dwelling place. And as I was coming to, I remember my lips were moving, but I didn't know what I was saying until I kind of opened my eyes a little bit. And I remember I was saying, I accept this. I accept this. I accept this. And, I took a few breaths and I remember taking in the room, and it was like a secondary wave of shock because the music was still going. People were still speaking in tongues. Like my friends' hands were still on me and no one knew what happened. Nobody. And so I remember reaching over, taking that hand where that power came from, like leading them around the edge of that pew and sitting them next to me. And it was a 13-year-old girl. And I just remember looking at her and then taking in the background story of everything. And that's when I realized that faith like a child, where her faith and my faith met, and in acceptance, miracles happened. And I remember in those moments looking at her and seeing myself. And so I made sure I said something to her. I said, honey, I want you to know something, because this girl, this 13-year-old girl was not a church going girl. She wasn't one that went to church on Sundays. She wasn't someone who memorized Bible verses or, wore long enough sleeves. Like, she was from a very broken home down the street that needed a safe place to go that Sunday. Like, it wasn't like she was anointed or even none of her family was there. She just came alone. It was just amazing. And so anyway, I told her that, honey, like, I want you to know something. I believe that what they, pointing at the elders, would call God and what I would call love, used you and your faith to heal me of cancer today. And I want you to understand that in that faith, that you and love are that powerful. And I want you to never forget that. And, when I left that church, from that moment, the moment that I realized all of that, I was different. I was never the same.
Wow. It's a very powerful story. And there's a lot of emotion from you. Is that gratitude, that emotion?
Yes. And what I've found in my journey is that, what I would call miracles and misery and pain and magic just go together, because I remember how terrified I was in those times. I mean, just like, I just don't think that terror describes what those feelings and the understanding of it is. And then looking back and being so overwhelmed and knowing that love was there the entire time, and just that everlasting, ever present, constant force that is always fighting, always protecting, always there. And so, yes, I would say I have so much there. Gratitude just isn't enough of a word, right, Heather? It's just not, but yes, gratitude would absolutely be that.
And just to wrap up the story, you then did go in for a mammogram and an ultrasound, and it ended up that not only were the lumps gone, but you could actually feel a crater left behind.
Yes. I think, yes, me leaving that part of the story out. Yeah. That's really where the gratitude, fully comes in, because there's no denial. There was no denial. So I went in for a 3D mammogram, which they can pick up the smallest amount, right? An ultrasound. And then the doctor came in and told me, it wasn't just that the lumps were healed. They were no longer there. Like, there were no lumps to find. And yes, there was a pinky, width crater in my ribcage and a bruise sensation that lingered. And it was a constant reminder of what love did, that it was real, that it was tangible proof that love stepped in and literally saved me once again in an amazing way.
And there's so much more to your story. And you also faced a lot of adversity. And I do recommend your book. And we're going to talk about that more in part 2, because it really is compelling. I found that I was intrigued from the start to the very finish. And so I do encourage people to read it, and I'll have a link in the description. But I still do have a lot of questions about this. So let's go ahead and take that into part 2.
Thanks so much for joining me on Beyond with Heather Tesch. That was part 1. Make sure to listen to part 2. And if you liked what you heard, please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe for more episodes.